I don't like to argue, so I say nothing and fume for days.
How do I set boundaries without sounding like a jerk?
I hate the idea that I might accidentally offend somebody, so sometimes I'd just rather say nothing at all.
Welcome to the Language Alchemy Podcast, and thank you for joining me today. This is your host, Alejandra Siroca, a transformative communication teacher and coach devoted to helping you have more peace and harmony in all your relationships. During the last episode, I talked about safety and connection, the two main needs human beings have in order to survive and thrive. I also shared that one of the main ways we can connect with others is through the way we communicate. Our language is so powerful that we can create connection with others, and we can also create division, alienation, and disconnection from others. In this episode, I like to teach you about one of the most disconnecting language devices you need to watch out for if you would like to have more connection in your life. Imagine going to a restaurant and the server takes the order of people who have arrived after you and leaves you waiting for a long time. How would you feel? Or imagine that during your work meetings, you keep offering suggestions that go unheard until another workmate makes the same suggestions, and this time people listen and find the suggestions very valuable. How would you feel? Connected or disconnected? And what do you think happens there with that server at the restaurant or the person running the work meetings? You know, even if that person hasn't said a word to you, what's happened is that they have labeled you. Labels create disconnection, hurt, harm, inequity, division. We could say that labels create suffering. I've had clients who have been labeled as ugly, stupid, weird, sensitive, difficult, easy, you name it. And they've all suffered greatly because of these labels. This is because when we give someone a label, we start not only seeing that person as that label, but we start seeing that person only through the lens of the label that we have given them. We communicate with them through that label and we treat them as if they were an unchanging embodiment of that label. And what sometimes happens is that we internalize that label and we start living our lives as if we indeed were ugly, stupid, weird, sensitive, difficult, etc. I will always remember the danger of labels when I was teaching about this at a workshop. A woman who came to the workshop shared that her mother gave her the label of heavy since she was a young girl. Then she shared that when she became a teenager, her mother would weigh her and remove food from her plate on a regular basis. Every time she stood on that scale per her mother's request, or when she would see her mother take food away from her plate, she would hear her mother say, heavy. Too heavy. This woman went on to share that her sister didn't receive this label. Her sister was not asked to stand on the scale or hand over her plate to their mother so that their mother could take food away from her sister's plate. How do you think this woman felt about herself? About her sister? Well, this woman and her sister were estranged from one another. And this is the danger of labels. In this case, the label of heavy disconnected this woman from her own self and from her family. And because she internalized this label of heavy, she made daily decisions for decades that affected her health, her relationships, and her own sense of confidence. All because of this label. And this woman's mother may have never known the extent to which the label of heavy impacted her daughter, who was now a grandmother, sharing that story. Labels are dangerous. and impact others in ways that we may not realize. I experienced this a lot during my 17 years as an interpreter. When the service provider, such as a healthcare practitioner or an attorney, used a positive label about a Spanish speaker that I was interpreting for, that service provider would offer detailed information and suggest access to several resources to that Spanish speaker. But when they used a negative label towards a Spanish speaker that I was interpreting for, the Spanish speaker would get general information and sometimes not a word about resources I knew were available for them. When I say labels are dangerous, I don't mean negative labels only. Positive labels can be very dangerous too. Most of my clients who were born in the US, whose parents or grandparents came from a country in Asia, shared with me that they feel so much pressure by their teachers and bosses to embody a label of smart, quiet, or obedient. The thing is that when we give another person or a group of people labels, when we interact with that person or someone we think represents that group, we interact from the foundation or the perspective of that label. And we stop being curious to discover who that person really is, what their dreams and aspirations are, or even see that this person is as alive as we are and therefore constantly learning, growing, and changing. When we give a label to another person, we see them always as that label and we see them as unchanging. And we could say then that labels are actually inaccurate because people are constantly growing and changing. This is why if you want to connect with others, I want to encourage you to remove the labels that you have learned to give others. If you want to feel a sense of connection, then remove the labels you use for yourself. And of course, doing this is easier said than done. That's why I invite you to spend 1 hour of your life with a notepad by your side. And every time you're aware of using a label in your thoughts, in your internal dialogue, or when you're interacting with someone during that hour, write that label down. And if you're willing, let me know how many labels you wrote during that hour. Then spend some time journaling about how the labels you're using about yourself or to describe others are impacting your life, your relationships, the lives of others, and the relationship with others. Then notice how these labels are creating or decreasing a sense of connection. As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to give a special thanks to my client Shannon for all the work she's done over the years to remove the labels from her vocabulary that were disconnecting herself from her own being. And during our next episode, I am going to be answering your question. Yes, next episode is a Q&A episode. So if you have a question, go to languagealchemy.com/podcast question and enter your question. I will answer it on the next podcast. Talk to you next week. And as we say in Argentina, ciao, ciao.